remember the moment. The room went quiet, the way you remember an unexpected silence in a place that used to be loud. Laughter stopped mid-sentence. Forks lay half-lifted. A candle guttered and held its breath. My grandfather said one sentence, and everything fell into a different shape. He asked if anyone had the original trust documents. His voice was soft. It carried weight. He did not smile. My parents shifted like people trying to find a lie that fit their mouths. My sister smoothed her dress in a movement meant to look calm. I sat with my hands under the table and felt every eye find me as if they had been waiting for me to break. I had planned my 30th birthday to be small. I had chosen a quiet restaurant because I did not want attention and because I wanted to see my grandfather smile. He kept a small kindness in his pocket for me. He had given it to me piece by piece over my life. He had told me stories about the trust he set up for me when I was a child and about a promise he carried in his bones. He had always loved precision. He kept his papers in a carved box. He kept his truths even more carefully. When he said those words, the panic in my parents' faces flashed fast and thin. My mother tried to laugh, and it came as a sound that had been smoothed too hard. My father cleared his throat. My sister said nothing. The question hung. And then my grandfather did the kind of small thing he always did before he made a point. He pushed his wine glass forward and tapped it twice with his spoon. We all watched the ring the spoon made on the glass. It was a tiny clock. Then he spoke again. He said he had spent the week looking through old files, and he found bank statements that confused him. He said he would read them aloud. He pulled a folder out of his coat, and the folder had my name on the front in handwriting I recognized from my childhood letters. I knew in that moment the birthday would not be the thing I had wanted. I also knew there would be no shouting from me. My revenge, if it came, would not rely on noise. It would rely on paper and time and the slow strip of evidence that had been left like breadcrumbs. I sat back and watched my parents constrict. 2 weeks earlier, I had been in my small studio apartment, stacking ceramic cups on a battered shelf and counting rent in my head. I taught art to first graders. My salary paid for groceries in a used car and the occasional coffee with a friend. I mended holes in sweaters instead of buying new ones. My life had the steady, dull ache of someone who hoped luck would arrive but did not expect it. My childhood memory of money was not bright. When I was 9, I had opened an envelope from my grandfather and found words about a trust opened in my name. It had been a promise to give me a chance at a life free from the constant gatekeeping my family practiced. My grandfather told me it was to protect me from the things the world did to people who looked like me and loved like me. The number on the trust was a way to imagine escape without the messy work of planning it. But I had never seen the money. My parents had always said the fund was invested wisely and would mature when I reached an age when I would understand how to use it. I had believed them because belief was simpler than accusation. My parents had a talent for stories dressed as concern. They used worry like a tool. They told me I was irresponsible when I spent money on a class or a trip. They called my choices selfish and then rewarded my sister for the same behavior. They used guilt and a kind of sentimental cruelty. When I asked for help with school fees, my father called me practical and calm. When my sister purchased a new car, my mother posted photos of her smiling in the passenger seat and called the purchase a deserved reward for being the golden child. You understand this pattern. I am telling you because it matters. Favoritism is a quiet theft. It eats away at presence and opportunity until you do not notice the holes until they are cavernous. 2 weeks before the dinner, my grandfather had given me a book of old letters he said he had found. He did not give me the book casually. He had asked to meet and then handed it to me with both hands and said he needed someone who would read it properly. I had laughed and said I was no scholar, but he looked at me as if he were passing me a key. The letters were from my grandmother to my grandfather. They were full of small details about wills, bank accounts, and a trust set up the month I was born. One letter had an account number written in the margin. Another had a note in the margin mentioning trustees who had a legal obligation. The handwriting was steady. The pages smelled faintly of pipe smoke and a perfume my grandmother used decades earlier. I had sat on my kitchen floor and read until the sun left the room. Something in those letters did not add up. The trust was to be for my life, education, housing, and startup capital if I ever wanted to start a business. The trustee names were familiar faces in the family. My grandfather told me he had been the one to insist on a layered guard against interference. He had insisted documents be stored in several places and a copy be delivered to a small local bank. He had warned my parents that the trust should not become a route for family spending before my name was called on the deed. When I called the bank to ask a question, I asked politely. The teller answered with a practiced script. She said records showed large withdrawals from an account in my name over 2 decades. Withdrawals in sums I had never received. I felt a coldness move through my body like ice water poured down a sleeve. I wrote everything down. I walked the little island of the kitchen and did not feel the floor under my feet. I kept thinking about how my parents had sold our old house and bought a new car the year I turned 21, how vacations seemed to become richer the year my sister graduated, how a new wing was added to the house, and then later remodels that smelled of varnish and success. In the background, my parents would say things like, "We had to make sacrifices for the family, and we had to think long term." They painted thriftiness like devotion. I began to gather small facts quietly, because people who steal usually leave pieces of themselves around the margins. I asked a family friend who worked in real estate if she had noticed property purchases under our family names. She told me she had seen a property transfer in our area with my parents listed as the beneficiaries and with a shell company attached. I wrote the address down and drove by. It was a tidy house with new shrubs and a mailbox with a polished brass number. My ally appeared in the form of my grandfather and a woman from his old lawyer firm who had once been his neighbor. The lawyer was retired, but her name carried the kind of authority that made people listen. My grandfather introduced her to me with a look that said he trusted me because he knew the way I would hold a truth. She told me to gather copies of everything I could find. She told me to keep the original safe and to let the paper trail do the work. When I spoke to my parents about small things like a particular repair bill, they smiled and answered with calm falsehoods. When I asked them if they remembered any trust distributions, they answered in a way meant to soothe. Their method was simple. They did not deny every fact. They denied the pattern. They said they loved me and loved my sister and made some choices for the good of the family. They offered excuses by way of edges. You will recognize those soft denials. They are meant to wear you down so you stop noticing the edges of your life. I kept quiet. I learned to read bank statements like someone learning a language. I found transfers and traced them to companies with names designed to look unremarkable. I found invoices that had been paid out of accounts in my name and then rolled into home improvements or tuition for my sister. Each line entry was a small theft. The totals became large after years of drip-by-drip withdrawal. My grandfather and I planned the birthday like a small box that would hold a small surprise. He did not tell my parents his plan. He told me he wanted the truth said in a place where witnesses would exist. He wanted the trap to be a celebration. Traps are cruel words for a kindness. He said he wanted me to feel safe and for the family to see the truth without him turning the birthday into a courtroom. He set the trap by ordering copies of old bank statements from the bank where the trust had been held for years. He had the patience of a man who had long practiced one thing. He folded the pages into a folder and stapled them like a book. The statements had withdrawal notes written in a ledger style with names and hints of why a payment occurred. Some entries were vague and some brutally specific. On my birthday, I walked into the restaurant with a small bouquet and a head full of nothing important. I carried my grandfather on the inside with a sense of gratitude for his last spare kindness. The restaurant smelled of lemon and bread. The table was small and lit by a single overhead bulb. My parents arrived wearing the proper polite smiles. My sister arrived with a laugh that hit somewhere too easily in the room. My grandfather was late, but he walked in like a man who had rehearsed the moment in a slow heartbeat and then placed the folder on the table. He did not read everything at once. He opened to a page and read the name of a company which had paid for an overseas school where my sister had spent a year. He read another page with a transfer to a builder which lined up with the story of a remodel at the house. With each page, he read names and dates and amounts, and the room grew tighter like a fist. My father tried to interrupt once, and my grandfather said simply, "Please let me finish." And the father folded his mouth closed like a hand slapped. My mother turned pale. My sister shook her head slowly, as if this were a scene from a film she did not want to watch. The waiter, somewhere in the periphery, slowed his step and pretended to absent-mindedly refill a glass. People at other tables shifted, but listened, but not too much. The truth had a way of being loud in small rooms. When the final documents were on the table, my grandfather slid a final sheet to the center. It was a deed for a property purchased under the name of a trust corporation, which had my name on the paperwork. The signature line had my grandfather's scribble, which I recognized as the one he used on gifts and checks he wrote to stray cats. The deed had been transferred years earlier to a company controlled by my parents. The words on the paper sat like small stones. My parents tried the old methods. They laughed, they deflected, they offered familial rhetoric. My father said, "We made choices for the family, and I should understand sacrifice." My mother said, "We thought we were protecting you by giving your sister a better start." Their sentences were all charm and absence. My grandfather set the folder down and looked at my parents like someone reading a ledger, not a list of excuses. He said what he had said initially about the documents, and then he said something I had been waiting to hear and also dreading. He asked if they had any legal right to the money. Silence filled the space. I felt my own breathing slow. My pulse moved in my throat. He had a lawyer present anonymously in the room, in the form of a friend of his who had come and sat 2 tables away pretending to eat. The friend was now tapping on her phone. She had already filed a notice of inquiry with the bank and with the local registrar. She had asked to remain anonymous publicly because public acts make people loud and messy. She believed paper in a quiet office would do its work without spectacle. You should know how important witnesses are. When wrongs happen among kin, the witness is often a stranger. I had one that night. I had a man who kept a pen and the patience to point at facts. My parents tried to stand. My mother reached for my sister's hand. My father apologized in a way meant to be a bridge. My sister looked between us and then left the table as if the restaurant were suddenly cold. She did not run. She walked with a method that spoke of protection. No one shouted. No one raised a hand. The silence contained a feeling close to pity and to shame. People at the other tables pretended to eat faster. I folded my napkin and put it down. I did not cry. My revenge was not a scream. It was evidence and distance. It was the slow removal of dependency. After the dinner, my grandfather drove me home. He did not celebrate. He said he was sorry we had lived with this for years. He held my hand and said if I wanted to pursue the case, the law would require time and patience. He said it would not be an easy path, but paper would show the pattern. We started with small legal letters. The bank responded with a statement acknowledging receipt of the inquiry. My parents' lawyer called and offered a package for silence and a plan to protect reputations. He used words like familial discretion and repair. He told me my options were fraught and my best move might be to accept a number and move on. I did not want his number. I wanted what was mine plus the truth. I found myself doing things I had not expected to do. I learned the name of a document I had never cared to know. I attended a consultation with a forensic accountant and watched him open a spreadsheet like a doctor would open an X-ray. He showed me transfers from my name to companies controlled by my parents. He traced purchases. He explained slowly. He said in a voice that did not pretend about feelings how long a drip could add up. His calm voice made the numbers look less like lists and more like crimes against a future. I hired a lawyer with the steadiness of a person who has worked many small injustices into larger claims. She said, keep the story public but precise. She said the court will not care about my feelings, it will care about proof. She advised me to stop contact with my parents while the inquiry continued. She advised therapy. She gave me a list of names. I felt haunted by small domestic memories and by an odd relief. I cried alone in my kitchen once, and then I cleaned the dishes like it was an act of return. I started to pay attention to the things having nothing to do with money. I took a night class in silkscreen printing. I saved the way a person saved breath. My life shrank and then widened as I learned to keep a boundary. My parents reacted in patterns I had seen before. They tried to bribe the situation with local kindness. My mother left a casserole at my door. My father pretended to be the injured party in lunch conversations with mutual friends. They sent messages meaning to soothe without ever apologizing in a way that acknowledged theft. Their defense took on a moral shape. They said they had only wanted to provide for everyone. They used the word sacrifice again, which had become a kind of weapon. My sister slipped in and out of contact. I learned she felt protected by the narrative my parents painted. She had benefited. She had not asked for investigation. Somewhere, she had learned to take comfort from being the preferred child. Later, she would say she did not know about the trust. I would learn from documents she had enrolled in an overseas program under circumstances bought with my funds. Public life is a strange lens. I made a short statement to a reporter when the lawyer said our case would proceed and it was safe to confirm. I did not want spectacle. I wanted the truth to be a matter of public record because my family had built much of their power on the fiction of reputation. When the story ran, people at my small school asked if I was all right. Some parents avoided me. Some colleagues said they had sensed something wrong for years. Social media became a quiet chorus of sympathy and opinions. The legal process moved like weather. There were motions and counters and the slow scratching of evidence through lawyers' pens. There were days when I felt exhausted and days when I felt like the only person with a clean hand. My grandfather came to hearings, and he sat in the back with a newspaper and a careful look on his face. He did not speak unless spoken to, and he spoke with the clarity of someone with no desire for spectacle. We won partial victories in hearings where a judge ordered temporary freezes on assets and required disclosure. I watched bank accounts open like boxes and their contents counted. I felt a complicated relief when the numbers came into view. I felt grief for the years lost and for the invisible life plan taken in increments I had not noticed. My parents' faces in court grew small in a way I could not have imagined. They had performed authority their whole lives, and suddenly the authority was a coat that did not fit. They tried to explain. They cited family need and emergency. The lawyer for my parents used phrases that had the soft cruelty of people who had learned to make excuses into stories. The court listened and then asked for budgets for the things paid for with my name. Paper proved the pattern. Revenge did not look like a public spectacle of violence. It looked like restitution and refusal. It looked like me signing a document in my own name. It looked like the slow reallocation of a life. The law did not give everything back at once. It offered a route to repair. It offered a ledger and a judge. It offered the rare thing those who were used to entitlement hate most, which was consequence. When we reached settlement talks, my parents offered a number low enough to be insult. My lawyer told me to be practical and to think long term. I thought about the trust as more than a number. It was a carved expectation. It was the shelter my grandfather had designed. I thought about my grandfather giving me the letters and the look on my sister's face as she walked away from the table the night of my birthday. I made a decision then that felt less like revenge and more like clearing. I refused the quick number for silence. I refused the apology that would be nothing more than a sound. I wanted the documents returned and the money replaced as the law allowed. I wanted public acknowledgement, which forced my parents into a kind of small humility. I wanted my sister to understand what had been taken from us both, even if she had been the one who benefited. The settlement took months. My parents agreed to pay back a portion of the amounts traced and to transfer a small property back into the trust. The judge ordered a monitoring clause. My grandfather watched me sign the papers, and his hand trembled a little when he squeezed mine. People imagine victory like a single bright moment. My victory felt like a drawer with the things in it reorganized. I had a bank account under my name with a sum that represented a life I could plan. I rented a small studio with more light. I bought a bed that did not sag. I took classes and made friends and learned to say no without a guilty echo. My parents moved into a smaller home with a darker garden. My sister reached out months later when she had read the settlement in the paper. She wanted to talk. She wanted to know why I had gone to the press. She wanted to know why I did not forgive. I told her it was not about punishment. I told her it was about truth. She cried, and then she asked for forgiveness. I told her I would give her time and honesty and a chance to be different. Therapy helped me in ways paperwork could not. I sat with a therapist who taught me to name small betrayals and not let them become only storms inside me. She taught grounding exercises, which felt less like magic and more like a way to come back to a body I thought the family had carved into pieces. Recovery meant building routines and making daily plans and showing up for myself. Quiet revenge in my life had another shape. It was the first time I signed a lease for a home without my parents' names anywhere on the dotted line. It was my first major purchase done by me and for me. I remember standing in an empty room with a box of books and thinking about how my grandfather had known where to hide the truth, and how slow justice, sometimes, is the only durable kind. There were no fireworks. There were phone calls from cousins who had not spoken in years, and then silence. There were neighbor greetings. There were bills and meetings and the slow chore of life. I learned to take pleasure in small things. I enjoyed coffee without guilt. I painted a wall a bold color and invited one friend to see it. I felt the kind of peace I had only imagined. Sometimes people ask about revenge and about whether the act left me satisfied. I answer carefully. Satisfaction is complicated. The truth returned like a ledger shifted and a life repaired. Some losses do not have a monetary equivalent. You do not get back the years when someone taught you to doubt your worth. You do not get back the simple trust given away in the small choices of youth. The settlement did not make those years whole. It made forward movement possible. When a new neighbor brought over a pie the week I moved in, the smell reminded me of the restaurant on the night my grandfather read the papers. I told myself the memory would lose its jagged edge as time softened corners. The final scene of my story is small and precise and quiet. I stood at the threshold of the house that had once existed in legal limbo, and I turned the key. The door opened to a living room bathed in afternoon light. I placed my hand on the banister and felt a normal heat. I sat at the kitchen table and signed a paper which made the house mine in the sense that mattered. I did not shout, I did not ring bells. I sat, and for a few minutes I did nothing and let my chest loosen. I know many of you are watching from other rooms of your life. You may have the same pattern of soft advice wrapped around control. You may be wondering how to begin. I will say plainly what my grandfather taught me by example. Start small. Gather evidence. Ask a trusted hand to help with practical steps. Find witnesses who are outside the loop. Do not let shame be the reason you carry someone else's theft into the future. If you are waiting for a dramatic victory, you may be disappointed. The kind of justice that matters often looks like routine. It looks like letters in envelopes and numbers on ledgers and quiet hearings where a judge speaks in a voice that does not gasp. It looks like rebuilding and therapy and small acts of courage. My grandfather died 2 years after the birthday question. He died holding my hand and telling me he had been proud. He told me to live without carrying the weight of other people's choices. His last words were small and clear, and he whispered them like a benediction. He did not ask me to hate. He asked me to be my own person. If you have been betrayed by those who should have protected you, know this. The road to reclaiming your life is uneven. It requires courage and paperwork and witnesses. It requires patience and legal help, and sometimes a small public record. It requires you to choose your own quiet revenge, which is less about ruining someone and more about ensuring you will not be stolen from again. You might not have a grandfather who pulls a folder across a table. You might have a friend, a lawyer, or an ally outside the family. Use them. Gather your letters and statements. Put your life in order, not because you are petty, but because you deserve to live with security and with truth. My last request for you is simple. If this story touched a part of you, share a line in the comments about your own small victories. Subscribe if you want more stories about people turning facts into freedom. Tell me how you returned a piece of your life. Your stories matter because they stop the quiet theft from being invisible. I walked away from the legal fight with a ledger that made sense, and with a house key, and with a life I planned. The revenge I sought was never the spectacle. It was the return of a future. It was paper with names on it. It was distance from people who used closeness as a way to take. It was the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding. There is power in small steps. There is restoration in facts. There is dignity in signing your name and in locking your own door. If you are standing in the wake of a betrayal, know that the work ahead is heavy, but it is not impossible. Find witnesses. Keep records. Insist on truth. Live for your own life. Thank you for listening and for holding this space. I will keep telling these stories because I believe quiet justice matters more than loud revenge.